Okay. Hi. Thank you for coming. My name is Harlan Brown. I am a docent / curator at Penny Lane Beatles Museum in Dunedin. And
Where is that located?
I'm sorry?
In Dunedin. I live in Dunedin, and this is the first I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Where is it located?
It's right behind, it's in the Sterling building, behind Rosie's. Yeah.
Sterling.
So,
Okay.
we've been there in this location for about 4 years now. And we've had a lot of publicity lately that we will be moving, but it is not going to happen until probably the beginning of next year. So don't concern yourselves with that. Please come to the location now and come and visit us. We've got about 800 pieces of memorabilia in the current location. It's about a quarter of what the collection is. It's the collection of one person, Dr. Robert Entell, still a working physician. And he started collecting 40 years ago when he was studying in England, and picked up a couple of things and came back to Dunedin, and then decided that this was something that he enjoyed, that it was going to give him some pleasure different than what he got from working and taking care of people. So we've got a lot of interesting things there, and I will show you some of the things we've got here. This is the entrance to the museum. Let's see if I can open this up a little bit. We have a guitar in the background there that's signed by Paul McCartney. And just below that we have a Hirschfeld print that I love talking about. And it's a print of Ringo. So we have gold records, platinum records. We've got a record down in the corner that was an acetate, which is the master record before production begins, of Elvis singing a couple of Beatles tunes. So we also have, to the left here, we also have some souvenirs that we sell. I'm wearing a prototype of a new shirt that we're going to have. Now this is what the cabinets look like. We've got ticket stubs from Candlestick Park, which was the last Beatles show, last concert. At that point, they were, after touring in the U.S. for 2 years, they were very disappointed that all that happened at the concerts was that people came and they screamed. And they really weren't there to listen to them. And the Beatles just wanted to make music for people. That's what their passion was. And that's why they decided in '66 to become a studio band. And I remember when I was young that people said, what? They're just going to be in the studio and nobody's going to be able to see them?
Scream?
But they were very prolific, and then some of their best works were created during that final half of their career. This is the cabinet that has most of our Yellow Submarine artifacts. And there's all kinds of things in there. We've got a bicycle seat from a Yellow Submarine bicycle. We've recently acquired the bicycles, so now we're going to have everything. But there's all kinds of great things in there, cookie jars and watches, all Yellow Submarine themed. And it's interesting, people come in and they visit and they stay for an hour, and then they come back months later and they find things that they've never seen before. Even though we've really never changed anything the way the museum is set up now. That'll be totally different than the new location. We have...
Oh, look at that. Oh,
those are applause dolls, and we've got a couple of different sets of them. But Applause was a company in California that did dolls for other entertainers as well. But these are great, and we love having those. And these are the Sergeant Pepper ones.
Oh, wow.
There we go. And we've even got a smaller set in that same cabinet. And this is a poster, which is not very easy to see, but it's a poster of a tribute of the Quarrymen, to the Quarrymen. And the Quarrymen was John's first band. When John and Paul met, John had already created this band that was playing local dances, and Paul had a mutual friend, school friend. His name was Ivan Vaughn, and Ivan took Paul to see the Quarrymen. And I heard a story on YouTube of Sean Lennon interviewing Paul, and he said, "So, Paul, how did you actually meet my father?" And Paul said, "Well, you know, I used to ride the bus." And he said there was this guy who was on the bus I just thought was really interesting looking, but we never spoke. He was kind of off by himself, and I was off by myself. But subsequently, Ivan Vaughn took Paul to see the Quarrymen, and there was John standing up on this truck with his band singing, and Paul looked up and he said, "Oh my God, it's the guy from the bus."
Wow.
And
It's meant to be.
they met, and really they hit it off right away. I think it was the next day that John asked him to join the Quarrymen. Paul also met a guy on the bus who was carrying a guitar, and his name was George Harrison. And when they started interacting, Paul said, "Hey, why don't I introduce you to my friend John?" And then the next thing that happened was that George was in the Quarrymen. And that was the end of the Quarrymen then. They continued playing as their own entity, but without John, Paul, or George. John, Paul, and George did play at Pete Best's mother's house. She won a lot of money. I believe it was playing the horses. And she bought a huge house, 14-room mansion, and she created a coffee shop in the basement, which she called the Casbah. And all the local bands would play there, including John, Paul, and George. They played as 3 guitar players singing. But when they went in the studio the first time, they were told they needed a drummer. And Pete Best was playing drums. He was the house drummer at his mother's house. And so they hired him to be the drummer. He was not the right fit. It wasn't that he was a bad drummer. He just wasn't the right guy for the job. And so in 1962, they replaced Pete with Ringo. And they knew Ringo because he was a local guy as well. So, let's see here.
That's quite a story. I'm sorry, sure, this was 62, you said?
In 62, yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
When they were playing, at this point, this is a picture that was taken by Astrid Kircher, who was a woman that they met in Hamburg. They were playing as a 5-piece band at that point. John had brought Stu Sutcliffe in as the bass player because John, Paul, and George were playing guitar. And they had Pete Best playing drums. And really, in Germany is where they honed their craft. They played 7 days a week, 6 shows a day, and they did it for months on end. And when they came out, they were showmen. They enjoyed entertaining people. But during that time, Stu met Astrid, and they fell in love, and he gave his notice to the band. He said, I'm going to stay here with her. I'm going to finish my art school education, and I'm going to move back to Germany, and I'm going to be with Astrid. Unfortunately, due to circumstances out of his control, Stu died of a brain aneurysm at 21 years old.
Wow.
And so, no bass player for the Beatles. Stu was the guy who came up with the Beatles name, but it was B-E-E-T. And John was the one who changed it to B-E-A-T because he was thinking beat music. It was the beat. They were all into the Crickets and the American bands that had insect names. And that's why Stu came up with B-E-E-T.
I mean, that would have been so 60s.
But John didn't like that, and so he figured
sorry.
beat was a much better name.
Yeah, I never knew where the name came from.
They became Beatles, and they're still Beatles.
Oh, goodness.
This is a display that we have of letters that Stu wrote, and this is John, Paul, and John, George, and Stu is in the middle. And there's some interesting letters. And this is a picture taken by, I believe it's taken by Paul's brother Michael. And it's them very young. Now, you got to remember, Paul and John were 15 and 16
Wow.
when they met in 1957. So they really only had a band for 13 years. But this is also including Pete Best, and he actually signed this photo. But the Beatles also, John, Paul, and George, also in this period helped decorate the Casbah where they were playing at Pete Best's mom's house. So this, I believe, is the last photo. And it's the Abbey Road album cover. There's a lot of things that go on with that album cover. Paul was the one who designed and had the idea to create this image. He called the guys the day before, and he said, you know, we're going to take promo pictures tomorrow, dress up. And if you notice in the picture, John, Ringo, and Paul are wearing suits and coats, and George is in denim. And I don't know whether that's to be attributed to the fact that he and Paul were always butting heads. Paul was he was a perfectionist, is a perfectionist, and sometimes he didn't like the things that George played and tried to tell him how to do things. And George was very, very easygoing and laid back. I don't know if you've seen the Get Back documentary that was done by Peter Jackson. It's on the Disney Channel. But it's a remake of the Let It Be movie. And the original movie really had a dark theme to it. It wasn't well produced. And Peter Jackson, who was from New Zealand, redid the entire movie, and they had 600 hours of film. The Beatles arranged to have the entire Let It Be sessions filmed, and that was the project, was they were going to have a documentary about them making this album. And there was a lot of infighting going on. There was at one point, George walked out and quit. And they coerced him back. But if you get an opportunity to see the documentary, it's really lovely. It's amazing to see them do that. Yeah.
Is the Beetle strategically placed behind them? Isn't that what the Volkswagen was called, a Beetle?
It was a Beetle, yeah, it was a Volkswagen Beetle. And one of the stories behind this photo was at that time, they said that Paul had died. And that this guy was a duplicate. That he was a doppelganger, and that he...
yeah, I think I remember that.
If you play the song backwards or something.
That had something to do with it. He was the fact that he was barefoot. That he would have been buried barefoot. The story was that John was dressed in white because he was the minister, and that Ringo was in tails was the undertaker. Paul was the dead body, and George was the gravedigger.
And the Beetle,
and the Beetle license plate. The license plate also said 28 if, which meant that if Paul had lived, he would have been 28.
So that was strategically placed.
Yeah, and this poor guy, every time he put a new license plate on, somebody stole it, and eventually he begged the motor vehicles to change his plate so that people would stop taking it.
Paul's also out of step with them.
Mm-hmm.
He's also out of step with them.
Yeah,
His right foot
foot instead of his left.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But you know, the thing about this photo as compared to the outtakes is that this is the only photo where they're in sync. Even though Paul is leading with a different foot, they all almost have the same exact space between them.
Yeah.
Because they really were in sync. And another fact about this photo is that there's a man in the corner here talking to the police officer in the van, and he was out shopping with his wife, and his wife was in a store somewhere. He was from Palm Beach. His name was Paul Cole, and somebody tracked that down, and I found out about it. But when they marched out of the studio here, I believe the man in the white here is George Martin. And they marched down here, and they put up a ladder in the middle of the street. The police stopped the traffic. And for 10 minutes, they went back and forth. And the outtakes are interesting because they're just not paying attention.
Where was that picture?
Abbey Road in London.
In London.
And there's now a live webcam 24 hours that faces down on there.
Yeah.
And you can watch people all day long trying to duplicate that.
Yeah.
They always do. People come into the museum and they say, oh, we were in London and we went across there and we did it. Here's the picture, and they show it. So, you know, it's a lot of fun.
It's really historic.
There's great things to look at the museum. I've only touched on a little bit of it. We hope that you'll come and visit us in the new location.
I will. This location.
I've got, let's see, I've got some trivia questions if you'd like to do that.
Yes.
And then I can answer some questions if that's possible, and that will be my talk. But, okay, so, first question. What was the name of the Beatles' first drummer?
You just told me too.
With an S.
And I've already said it.
Yeah, 3 times.
Yeah, it was Pete Best.
Yeah.
Pete.
Colin Hanton was the drummer for the Quarrymen. And it wasn't Andy White who was the first, who played on the first Beatle record, Love Me Do. And the reason that Andy was brought in was because George Martin didn't think that Ringo was prepared. He'd only been in the band 2 weeks. And when Ringo walked in the studio, there was this other guy with his drums set up, and he was quite miffed and didn't let George Martin forget it, ever. He always had something to say about it. But there are actually two versions of Love Me Do. One is with Andy White and Ringo playing tambourine. You can hear the tambourine in the background. And the other one is of Ringo playing the same song, no tambourine. Okay, so the next question is, what was the last Beatles album that was released?
Let it be. Let it be.
I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah, it was Let It Be. Get Back actually was they were supposed to be released the other way around, but Let It Be was actually the last one.
What year was
Because
it?
they did the movie. That was 1970.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
had
last
that.
question.
I
What
had
was the
that.
original working title of the song Yesterday? You know, they used to use place cards,
Sure.
words. They would put words and phrases to
Remember.
remember the timing of the songs. And Paul had a particular thing that he put in there for Yesterday. Nobody has an answer?
No.
Okay. It was called Scrambled Eggs.
Oh my gosh.
Same syllables.
Oh.
And he actually said it went, scrambled eggs, oh my baby, how I love your legs. and it all goes with the song, you know. But he did that, John did that. They learned that from each other. They always had place marks, so they knew where to put the phrasing. And none of them wrote music. They still don't. Paul didn't write anything. They don't read music. Paul has composed operas and symphonies without writing it down. Other people transcribed them. Everything came out of their heads. And when you see the Get Back documentary, it's amazing to watch Paul create the song Get Back on his bass guitar. And it just comes out, you know, and you watch it and you're saying to yourself, come on, finish it. I know how it ends, you know. It's really interesting to watch. They were very creative, very prolific. Most of their songs have been covered by myriads of other people, and they've held up all these years. And they say that 100 years from now, their music is still going to hold up. So,
Yeah, just
that-
talking about it the other night. My friend's grandson, this is 4 generations later, knows all their songs.
yeah. There's a woman who brings her son in. He's about 10 years old,
Yes, yes.
and she quizzes him at the museum. Apparently she quizzes him all the time. He's a smart kid, but he knows everything about the Beatles.
Yeah, they do. Even the youngsters.
Any other questions?
What hours is the museum open?
The museum is open from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Rarely closing for holidays, but right now where we are, if the Sterling artists close for a holiday, then we're closed for the holiday.
Is there an admission fee?
No, it's free admission currently.
Donation?
In the new location, that's the jury is out on that at the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
It's just going to be such a large location. There probably will be admission, but we'll see.
Okay. We'll be there. I'll be
Did
there.
the Beatles really introduce themselves to us in this country?
Well, they
Was
were
there
first
such
seen
a-
on Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan Show.
Okay.
I remember
Yeah,
that.
they were on Ed Sullivan in 1964, but
64.
they were just starting to be played. There was actually a girl in Philadelphia who had heard about them through somebody who she knew, who her parents knew in England. And she started calling the radio station in Philadelphia asking for Beatles music. She was the first person, apparently, who was noted for calling the radio station and asking for Beatles music to be played. Also, 2 weeks before the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, Jack Parr made an announcement that there was this fantastic band in England and they were going to be coming to the U.S., so he actually preempted
My husband and
Ed
I.
Sullivan by 2 weeks.
Yeah, I was there. My husband and I were driving somewhere. He was driving us somewhere. And he said, listen to this. He said, this is the newest bunch of music and group. You're going to love this. And he turned up his radio on the car, because that's the best we had back then. And I listened to the Beatles, not knowing, never had heard of them, you know. But then they came on Jack Parr and then Ed Sullivan, and they became it, just like he predicted.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, when they were on Ed Sullivan, they were amazed at the reception, the screaming. And in the beginning, it was unique. They thought that that was really fun.
Entirely different.
But nobody listened. When they were in Germany, people actually came to the Star Club and they danced and they listened to them. Of course, they weren't the only band playing, but still, they were playing
Well,
for
it was
people.
a whole different style. You
Yeah.
know, we were used to jazz at that time.
Sure.
And,
They were the only ones who wrote their own music at that point. They were playing cover music, other people's music in the beginning. Everybody in all the bands in England, they were all playing everybody else's music, and they said, why should we do that? We can write better music than them. And they did. So,
Were they primarily self-taught?
oh yeah. Yeah.
They did
Yeah, they didn't read any music at all.
that's amazing.
I can understand that. I didn't either.
As a drummer, what songs are some of your favorites by them?
Some of my favorites by them.
Really, I love that.
Well, I'd have to say Get Back Now is one that intrigues me because I never really thought about the fact that Ringo is left-handed and the way he approached the drum set was different than I do as a right-handed drummer. So when I played Get Back, I always played it as a right-handed drummer. And now I'm trying to change the way I play it because it sounds differently.
Yeah.
You know, the notes are different. I play it in a descending tone, and he played it in an ascending tone. He said, "How can I lead with my right?" You know, even though he was playing this way, he had to lead this way. And I thought that was really interesting. And I've seen a couple of videos on YouTube of him doing that and talking about it. So that is really one of my favorites. And the things that he played in A Day in the Life were really interesting as well. Just amazing drum fills. And he was so simple, but he played just what was needed. And again, in the Get Back documentary, you see that he's just sitting in the back while the other guys are flailing away trying to figure out what's going to happen with the song, no matter which song it was. And even when Paul starts the Get Back rhythm, he came up with something right away, and you can hear it starting to gel. So that was really a strength of his, was that he just was out of the way, kept his mouth shut. Apparently, he liked his wine, and that probably kept him mellow. And I noticed recently that he sat on a drum stool that was about that big, And I can't fathom sitting on anything like that. You know, I'm not a big guy, but it would be so terribly uncomfortable. But back then, that's all we had. I didn't think about it back then. I started playing in 1967, and that's what I had. But now I noticed it. How did he do that? That's the first thing I'm going to ask him if I meet him.
I
Where
would
does
think
he live?
because of the size of it compared to the size of a human being sitting
Yeah.
on it,
Yeah.
it would give a person more flexibility.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. Comfort is everything. Anybody else? Yeah.
Just a comment. I wonder, like, if they, from their creative style, like, you know, bringing out a song, creating a song, versus what goes on in the studio now, you know, with musicians, and like all the auto tuning and all this perfectionistic sound. Sometimes that's very repetitive, and I wonder if musicians nowadays could learn a lot from the Beatles and their creative process, you know, without computers, without, you know, going back to the drawing board in essence in the studio without all that.
Yeah, the process now is very digitized. I have a friend who has a recording studio, and he almost refuses to do anything but analog to tape. But the Beatles had minimal technology. In the beginning, they had 2-track tapes. And when they graduated to 4-track tapes, it was an amazing improvement. But still, 4 tracks was only 4 instruments. And then they had to be condensed, bounced down to 1 track, and then they would use another tape to create the next 4. And I think they got up as far as 32 tracks for Sgt. Pepper. But it wasn't until recently that George Martin's son has been able to go back to the original recordings and find the separation between all those tracks, and really has enhanced the sound of the recordings. So you actually hear the nuances that were buried in all those tracks. That's an amazing thing that has been done with digital. That they had no inkling of back then. They actually took the tapes and stretched them out, and in order to get certain sounds, they put pencils in. They would have an engineer stand and hold the pencil out so the tape would go, and they were all in different rooms stretching the tapes out. It was amazing. And they didn't really even cut them very much. You know, you could cut the tape and get the bad things out, but I don't think in the beginning they even did that. And George Martin was so instrumental in helping them develop the ideas that they came in with. John did wild things. Apparently, they swung Mal Evans, who was their road manager, and he did everything. He was their gopher. He took all their notes. In the documentary, you see John say, "Mal, write this down," and Mal would write down something that John needed to remember. But John wanted a particular sound, and they didn't know how to get it, and they swung a microphone around while John was singing. John laid on the floor, and they put the microphone above him to see if it sounded different. They did all kinds of crazy things. The main engineer, Jeff Emmerich, used to record symphonies before rock and roll bands started to come into the studio. And he was actually the first engineer to take the bass drum mic and put it in front of the bass drum. They used to have the bass drum over there, at the back of the room, and they would put the microphone out here, and all you got was this cacophony of oh, it sounded like that, and it shouldn't have. He wanted the drums to sound punchy. Ringo used to put towels over the drums to get different sounds, and in the rooftop concert, you can actually see that he has a towel on his snare. They all did wild things to make different sounds, and they're so cool that they did it so long ago. Anybody else?
I'm sure you know Ringo Starr is going to be at Everett Hall in June.
I know, he hasn't invited me. I would love to do that. It's been sold out for 2 years, I think. But maybe he'll come and visit the museum.
Is Paul or Ringo aware of the museum existence?
They have not been, no, not that I know of. I'm hoping that we'll get one of them or both of them to do that, but we'll see. I know Paul's going to be in Orlando, not too far away. People drive to see us at the museum from Orlando all the time.
That's right, it's not that far.
Yeah. So that is the story of Penny Lane Beatles Museum as it stands right now. Just keep an eye out for our new location. It's at 2046 Bayshore, which is about halfway between downtown Dunedin and the Dunedin Causeway. It's about 2 miles. And I'm sure we'll get plenty of television coverage and newspaper. We've been fortunate to have great coverage from lots of different media. We had a great article in the Jewish Press and all the local papers, the Dunedin Beacon,
And Clearwater.
and Clearwater, yeah. Mm-hmm. Charlie Belcher has come to see us, and we were on Channel 10, we were on Bay News 9, and I'm sure there's lots more to come.
When are you moving? Are you moving there?
We'll be moving. We're in the process, but it's not going to be finished until the end of the year, probably, or the beginning of next year. So thank you for letting me come and talk to you, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the museum.